Hi folks, it's Alan here, and I'm still in my electronics cave. This is going to be a slightly longer format video though, where I'm going to explain a bit about what is oversampling, what is it, why we use it, and why is it important in a good digital-to-analog converter. And to fully understand this, I'm going to go right back to the days when CDs were first invented. Now, there's a mathematical theorem that's been around for many decades called Nyquist-Shannon theorem. This is a bit of maths that demonstrates that if you want to faithfully reproduce an analog signal from a series of digital samples, you need to sample at twice the maximum frequency that you want to resolve. So for CD, the original inventors postulated that the range of human hearing goes up to about 20 kHz, a bit less for most people, and therefore if they sampled it just over twice that frequency, they'll be able to recreate the original signal. So the CD sampling frequency of 44.1 kHz was born. Now, there's another common sampling rate of 48 kHz, which is also widely used, and my DAC handles that too just fine, but I'll stick to talking about CD for now. Trouble is, that's when the problems actually started. Basically, if you just stick a 44.1 kHz digital signal straight through the DAC, it sounds truly awful, and that's actually down to the reality of electronics, particularly analog circuitry. Firstly, although 44.1 kHz does give a maximum frequency reproduction of 22 kHz, it also generates a lot of crud just above this frequency range, lots of higher frequency harmonics which play havoc with electronics, and furthermore, because of an effect called aliasing, higher frequencies can actually be interpreted even as even multiples of lower frequencies. So for example, a 30 kHz signal might actually be heard by us as unwanted harmonics at 15 kHz, 7.5 kHz, and that's very, very much within our theory, within our hearing range. Now, in theory, you can eliminate this problem by having a very, very sharp analog cutoff filter that throws away anything over 20 kHz or so. But in practice, this is very hard to do, even with modern analog electronics. So to get around this idea, the idea of oversampling was introduced. Essentially, you take a 44.1 kHz signal, do some digital processing on it, Fourier transforms and other clever maths that generate digital data streams that represents exactly the same data, but at a higher frequency sampling rate. So, in my case, I'm using 8 times oversampling, so effectively I'm using this Burr-Brown DF1706 chip here to generate a 352.8 kHz sampling rate, and this is the data that's coming out of that. The bottom is actually the 352 kHz clock that is showing basically the full sampling rate for the data that I'm using. The one above that's the bit clock, and the top two lines are the left and right channels basically coming out. Now, in practice, I've also increased the bit depth from 16 bits to 24 bits to give much more accuracy in the maths, and there are a couple of other digital filters in there, including finite impulse response and noise shaping, but oversampling is actually the main bit that we're using here. So actually from this point forwards, my DAC, actually all of the rest of this DAC circuitry, is actually a 352.8 kHz 24-bit DAC. And we can turn this into analog relatively easily. We still have a problem that there's unwanted rubbish above that 352 kHz range though, but since the human ear can't hear anywhere near that high, you can build an analog filter, which is this section of circuitry here, that just gently rolls off the frequency response above about 20 kHz or so, and by the time you get to 352 kHz, the rubbish is all discarded. Now, you may have heard a lot about no-oversampling DACs, or NOS DACs in the hi-fi world. So what's that all about? It can actually be extremely misleading. Most NOS DACs are actually running at 192 kHz or 384 kHz, which is exactly what I'm running at here. But unless your source material is recorded at this very, very high bitrate, which is, I have to say, extremely unlikely, it's likely that the vast majority of source material just simply isn't going to be recorded at that level. In fact, the vast majority is still available at 44.1 kHz. So what's actually happening is that the streamer or digital source you're using to feed into the DAC needs to interpolate the data from that 44.1 kHz up to the necessary 384 kHz bitrate. This is oversampling. It's just covered up by terminology. Some people call it upsampling or interpolation, but it's exactly the same maths under the hood. The only difference is that by doing the maths in your PC or streamer, you're effectively taking advantage of plentiful cheap processing power that's available in the onboard microprocessors and eliminating the need for a specialised digital signal processor chip like the Burr-Brown one I'm using in this design. It's the same thing though, it's just cheaper to implement. And one final thought, if your source material is 44.1 kHz, should you resample it to 48 kHz to use the highest possible frequency rated input to your DAC? Very simple answer, no, don't. By doing this, you might lose data, not gain it. Unless you increase the bit depth at the same time to 24 or 32 bit, you're only damaging the signal. And even if you increase the bit depth, you're not really adding anything, just changing it a little bit. So there it is, and that's how and why we use oversampling. But just one final thought, please remember I'm launching my own DAC through a Kickstarter campaign in the near future, and I need your help. So please go along to my website, apexhifi.co.uk, and sign up to my mailing list. And when we're ready to launch, I'll let you know, and maybe you can help me get the word out there.